All right, today we'll be discussing atypical sexual behavior, paraphilia. We'll look at some fetishes. What are the psychological mechanisms behind that? Motivations, drives, characteristics of different forms of paraphilia, decent exposure, growing up against individuals for some sort of pleasure or stimulation. We'll also look at pedophilia and some other facets of atypical sexual behavior. All right, so we say define paraphilia is uncommon sexual expression. A little bit of distinguishing between sort of atypical and paraphilia would be atypical would just be uncommon, but it may not impact our functionality within society, our relationships with others. We may not deem it to be something impeding to our own growth or our own flourishment as an individual. It may not impact our work life or relationships. But once we get into the paraphilic sort of descriptions of things, then we get into the necessary components that drives individuals to have these sort of expressions, which can be highly disturbing or distressful to either themselves or distressful to others in very manner of ways. Sort of coercion and forcing and using power and manipulation. All right, so paraphilia, uncommon sexual expression. Some considerations. Behaviors represent extremes on a continuum, right? So we're looking at the DSM-5, and we're trying to diagnose an individual, right? Some of the criteria be it has to be on a continuum. It has to be persistent over time. It has to be recurring. It can't just be one-offs. It has to be something that has reoccurred in multiple situations. Right, and the definition of paraphilic behavior is persistent urges, desires, right, in order to facilitate some sort of sexual behavior. Meaning that it's quite necessary to be sexually aroused based on these particular characteristics. Now, atypical, you may say, well, not necessarily do you need to have that thing happen. Right? You may like it. Right? We're looking at things like fetishes. You may say, I have a fetish, but I don't necessarily need it every time. Right? I like it, but it's not necessary. Right? I'll be able to perform my sexual behavior or be aroused, but not necessarily needed. It's not a necessity. We're looking at paraphilia, we're kind of looking at necessities to even facilitate sexual life. Not all paraphilias are psychological disorders, right? We think of things can be maybe somewhat genetic in some sense, right? We saw in prior chapters how overproduction of testosterone prenatal leads to limitation. We saw that even linked to homosexuality. Prenatal expressions of too much production of testosterone. That's one of the theories, but there's a multitude. Okay? So sometimes it could be genetic. More cases of males reported than females for paraphilia.
In our vocabulary, is there a distinction or a word that you do use specifically for, you're saying a person, the need for the fetish or whatever? Is there a word for this person needs it versus this person just like prefers it? In the vocabulary sense of, okay, I'm trying to diagnose this person. Is this something they really, really prefer, or has this become to a point where it's like they need it? So is there
You would say functional. Right, that thing is, yes, the object is functional for the arousal. So you're looking at function of something. You're like, hey, in order to be aroused in a I need to look at other people who are undressing in nude performing sexual acts. If I don't see that, I can't be sexually aroused. There's no response. Right? It's a facilitator. Where someone else would be like, take it or leave it. Yeah, sometimes this, sometimes that. Right? But we're talking about paraphilia, we're talking about this is quite necessary for the stimulation of sexual arousal. Without it, there's no arousal. Which makes it rare. So if you kind of think of that, you're like, well, that seems to be rare. Right? Because I think we could give and take a lot of things that we may desire or motivate or drive, but we may not need them all the time to arouse and produce those things. Right? Things can be helpful time to time, but not necessary. So interesting, more cases of males reported than females altogether for characteristics of paraphilia. And we'll look at the different things. Often occur in clusters, right? So typically it may be one facet of stimulation and also go hand in hand with another. Maybe you need to have a little bit of voyeurism, right? Observing others undress without them knowing, unwilling participants. And maybe you also need to have an object present too. Maybe you start to cluster the behavior together with other components of other behaviors. So often these acts are dependent on for sexual satisfaction and may alienate others, leading to difficulty in establishing relationships. We'll look at two forms, coercive ones, one where people are unwilling to participate in your paraphilic behaviors, right? Using power, force, other techniques. We'll look at ones where sometimes it can be consensual, right? Atypical, which is like fetishes that people agree upon to engage in for their own sexual satisfaction. Fetishistic disorder. Right? Sexual arousal associated with focus on inanimate object or non-genital body part. When we say when we're talking disorder, we're always talking about distress or dysfunction. Right? It has to be distressful to the individual or distressful to others, and it has to be dysfunction. Right? Meaning it impedes or stifles or gets in the way of growth, personal growth, work, relationships with your family, right? Socialization processes, things of that nature. That's when we get into the disorders. So we say, hey, fetishistic disorder, necessary for you to have an inanimate object or non-genital body part. Non-genital could be like, you like feet. And you need feet in order to satisfy your sexual desire. Right? Requirement. Feet be present, or you touch it, kiss feet, etc., etc. Right? It could be hands, it could be toes, it could be a particular object that you need around in order as a requirement to satisfy that motive, that drive, that urge. Transvestic disorder, one that's also predominated by men. Sexual arousal derived from wearing clothing of other gender. Right? So we're saying dressing up as the opposite gender, which you are, as a form of arousal for sexual gratification. Sexual sadism disorder. Right? We say sadism is pain. Pain towards either your participant, whether it be willing or unwilling, or either to yourself. Say, I like pain during the course of my sexual behavior. Right? Pain will be necessary for the fulfillment. Either watching others in pain or yourself. Right? And that's the masochism. So a lot of times we put them in BDSM, right? Binding dominance, right? Sadomasochism. Right? I would like to bond or restrict individuals from movement to ensure that they power control during the sexual process. or we feel that we can dominate them in some way, right? Exuding some sort of power over them, which is a driver for sexual satisfaction, or we're dealing with pain, right? Yes.
Are any of these disorders come with other types of disorders? Because, like, for example, the sexual sadism, it sounds very much like, as you said, having the feel you're powerful, and it sounds very antisocial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely can draw characteristics from things that could be antisocial personality disorder when we're talking about sociopathy, psychopathy, narcissistic behavior. So yes, they can sort of overlap, and they could possibly be associated with one another, right? But not necessarily, right? Not necessarily so. It really depends case by case. Because we say, hey, it may be genetic, it may be environmental, because if we're talking about sociopathy, that's driven by environment. Psychopathy is driven by genetics. There's no change in that, right? And narcissistic sort of behaviors would be also probably environmental as well too, right? Predominantly environmental, but not necessarily, right? But definitely you can see characteristics of that. We're talking about power, dominance of others, a lack of empathy towards others, of course. Exhibitionistic, right? Flashers, people who like to flash. Maybe you go on the CTA train or the bus and someone exposes themselves in some way. Indecent exposure. You say, well, what's driving that behavior? What would you presume would drive such behavior? What would someone like to expose themselves to for sexual gratification? What would be the motive of driving?
I think on the lighter end, you have like sports stadium streakers and stuff, and I think on one end, it really does just tie into the attention you're getting. Like, I've just 820,000 people looking at me and stuff, but on the other end,
I guess the street is some people will street music with that on it and they just want $20,000. So,
yeah.
like,
yeah.
streaking at a sporting event, there's a lot of money involved.
Yes, but you've also seen it where someone like runs out there and they're very much like, look at me, and it's like all about me.
And which is interesting, right? You could say maybe possibly as narcissistic tendencies, right? That pay attention to new criteria. Possibly you say, well, it doesn't really relate in a sports venue because you're not going to get the same response you would if you expose yourself.
Well, I think it's a bit more response than for someone on the CTA.
Yeah, right? Because it's more intimate. Right? 30,000 people versus one-on-one, there's a big difference. An intimate setting, right? A fixation on certain individual. So we say here, the driver, the motive is the response. Person is driven by the response that they receive from another person. Yeah.
I think it might also be an environmental thing, like if they're like, maybe they're like the middle child of like 10 kids, like they were never seen growing up, they weren't seen in school, they weren't seen at work, like they were never appreciated for anything that they did, and this was like the one thing that they could do where people actually saw them and there was a reaction to it.
Yeah, it possibly could be a component of that. Right, because we're saying, hey, this is a lot of theoretical things. We can't, for absolute, describe how every person facilitates these behaviors. But we definitely could say there's, predictors and likelihoods that could drive such behaviors. Even in exhibitionistic, there's different categories in that. Those are those who may expose themselves. We're talking about men, flaccid or erect. Now you get totally different drivers, right? One dealing with introversion and extroversion, even on exposure, right? So it gets pretty nuanced as we kind of look more into the behaviors, right? The different facilitations. Voyeuristic, sexual arousal associated with observing naked bodies or sexual activities of people without their consent, right? You say the driver hears people not knowing. If they were to know that we're watching them, functionally, for someone who is disordered, they would not be aroused. The arousal would go away because they know that the individuals that they're watching knows that they are watching them. Frauderistic, individuals who may like to rub up on people, or touch, right? Think in public places. I don't know if you know, any of the females in class may have experienced such things where you're in a crowded bus, a crowded train, or a crowded sort of venue, and felt like someone tried to rub up against you purposefully, right? So cop a feel to something. Right, pressing or rubbing against an unwilling person in a crowded public place. You think about getting away with something. Once again, it's this unwillingness, it's this power, it's like this coerciveness, not giving individual a choice. Right? Using the situation where they really don't have a choice. That will be the drive for the sexual activity. We think of this as a lot of impulse, meaning there's a lack of restraint and control yourself for these activities. When opportunity seems to present itself, most of these individuals with disorder have to react. They can't help themselves. Right? Whereas normal people say, hey, maybe we do have situations where we may have some crazy thoughts, fetishizing disturbances in some way, but we know how to control ourselves. Right? We're a little bit more disciplined to not act out the behavior. Because one of the behaviors may be illegal, in which case it gets us a lot of trouble. We know that stuff kind of impacts work, meaning that you won't be able to secure jobs if you've been sexually harassing people, coerciveness, frauderistic behaviors, right? Because that's going to be dysfunctional to you surviving out there in the world. So we say these individuals have a lack of impulse control. They can't help themselves, or they feel that the urges are too strong. Right? Most of it goes with fantasy. Right? We all have fantasies to some degree, but these individuals also have the urge and impulse to act out the fantasies. And then pedophilic disorder, sexual activity with a prepubescent, we're thinking 13 years or younger, or recurrent sexually arousing fantasies or sexual urges to engage in sexual behavior with a child, right? And even those are broken up into further categories of different types of pedophiles, right? Ones who feel more aligned with the mental states of the children that they interact with. They feel more comfortable with children. You have the aggressive pedophile types, ones who want to do harm, kidnap, kill, right? Sexually abuse children. Not necessarily feeling that they're comfortable around children. They just want to harm them to some degree. Right? So there's different kind of stratifications on the level of even pedophiles. You get different types of pedophiles. And we'll look more at that. Yeah, but voyeuristic, peeping toms, right? Would be kind of common. All right, so we say fetishism. Okay, and then an object. Symbolic transformation. Object of fetish becomes endowed with the power or essence of its owner. Right? We say fantasy is limited. It could be an object that absolutely has no power in any real sense. There tends to be like a dissociative mechanism going on there between reality versus fantasy. Right? The object is endowed with the power or the essence of its own. Right? Meaning that you're transferring how you feel you have this disorder into some sort of object, you using this object to disseminate your authority over others. would say typically men are prone to transvestic disorder, often reveals a pattern of conditioning. Usually it goes through stages, right? It may begin with wearing one particular piece of articles of clothing, and may spread out into multitudes until finally we have complete cross dressing. Right? What would be some of your hypotheses on why one will have transvestic disorder or transvestic tendencies sexually? Why would dressing up as the opposite gender be a motivator and drive for sexual arousal?
I have heard that a lot of, someone who has a lot of power, like a CEO, and in the bedroom wants to let go of all that power and authority, so especially because it's such a closed man, I could see it along the lines of some kind of desire to embrace the other gender role, like go of masculinity, embrace femininity of some sort, and putting that, especially in like outside clothing or something, like I imagine there's a feeling of like once I get all done up and I, like feeling the clothing or the makeup or whatever.
Like a transference of masculine dominant power into a more submissive feminine sort of.
Yes, but also like the idea, I think it's also part of my intention, like putting on a costume, like you're putting on a persona, like you could be someone new, so it's like, I could see it almost as like a
Role
relief of, yeah, a role play, I get to do something else, I get to switch. And then because it's so prone to that, I could see that it's something along the lines of gender roles, or they want to escape the masculine gender roles.
Alright, interesting. Will says it has a little bit to do with role playing, a little bit of transference from masculinity to femininity. Anyone else? Sort of searching. Common fetish items, right? We say red pumps, right? Red pumps have become synonymous with sexy or sexual fantasies. So, we talk about brasiers and women's underwear. Right, highly linked, I guess, to the proximity to genitalia, to breast, etc. With these items. This may be part of a cultural phenomenon. Maybe it's the color, red is vibrant, stimulates. Maybe it's the high heels, right, the length of them. We're talking about 6-inch high heels versus 3 to 4, 2-inch heels. Sexual sadism and sexual masochism, right? So SM behavior association with pain. Sexual arousal through giving physical or psychological. So it doesn't have to necessarily just be tying someone up or choking someone to some degree. It could be more the psychological pain that you have to endure or that you have to endure. Maybe you're exposing them to some sort of images that may be painful to them psychologically, and that can give you sexual arousal. And the masochism part is the reception of physical or psychological. Right? You want to be exposed to something, or you want to be physically sort of binded or restricted in some way, or hurt as part of your sexual experience. We got autoerotic asphyxia, right? Enhancement of excitement and orgasm by pressure-induced oxygen deprivation, which is choking, but in all sorts of ways. used to be very popular, I think, in the 90s, kind of tying yourself up by the neck with like a belt or a rope. And the men would sort of participate in masturbation at the same time. There was a very famous singer, actually from one of my favorite groups of all time, NXS. Right? The lead singer, Michael Hutchins, he died though. They had the #1 album in the world at the time of his death. Bigger than YouTube and all that stuff. So he died from autoerotic asphyxia. Yes.
Could that just be operant conditioning as you're preparing? You are creating an environment where you are changing behavior to be conditioned to a certain situation.
For this particular case, possibly. You're saying just changing the environment to change the behavior?
You're changing the environment, you're associating the asphyxiation with pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So could that be operant conditioning?
All right, so you're associating the pain with pleasure as part of operant conditioning. Yes. Right? I'm trying to think there would be a little bit of classical conditioning too. I think it could be a little bit of both, but maybe more inclined towards operant conditioning in the sense that it probably had to occur, maybe most likely through a traumatic event or several traumatic events, such as through childhood. Yeah, that's an interesting take. I think fundamentally it may be more inclined towards operant conditioning than classical. Remember that in classical you can kind of associate one thing to another, stimulus wise. But yeah, it's interesting. That's a good question. Exhibitionism. Right? We got a guy flashing a woman right there, right? And she's doing the right thing. She's looking away. So for him, he may be dissatisfied. Right? He may not get the pleasure that he sought out from the individual because he was looking for a different reaction. Or he got the reaction he wanted. Right? Maybe she saw what he exposed, and this is what we're seeing a couple seconds later. Right? Her in distress. He's seeing her in distress, disgusted, not wanting to do it. And maybe that's what he was going for. Right, as opposed to what we're seeing with the streakers at the football game, baseball game, usually people laugh. Right? So that's a little bit different. Here we're saying we look, typically you're looking to cause distress from women. I don't know if laughter that qualifies as a distressful response. Maybe it could. Right? Maybe sometimes we do laugh out of expression of painful emotions. Typically, sexual gratification is obtained by masturbating shortly thereafter, such as the example individual on the bus exposing themselves. They found a victim that viewed them at the same time. They may want to masturbate along with the reaction, right? Using mental images of the observer's reaction. So we say here the driver is the mental image. Right? It's the response that they see that stays with them that drives the motivation. That mental image of the reaction. They've caused another person to respond certain, which in that sense is some sort of power-driven element. All right, suggested response. Ignore calmly. Ignore calmly takes away the power. Kind of like, hey, so what? Right? Who cares? Take away the power from everybody. Distance yourself immediately. And obviously, the important territory. Voyeurism. We don't know if, can't say for sure that viewing of pornography qualifies as voyeurism in some way, right? You say here is sexual arousal from observing others undressing or engaging in sexual activity without consent. Usually this is a live performance. Like something live, not something we're just looking up on our phones, tablets, TVs, individual engaging in sexual acts. Although maybe we can talk about the negative aspects of masturbation right? Because there's different sort of theories on preoccupation or addiction to masturbation, which is very common now amongst your generation, your age group. Common kind of across the board for men, but really hyper-vigilant in your age group for men. And just due to obviously dopamine release in short bursts, but it also sort of stifles sexual performance. So now you have a virtual viewing, and now you've rewired your brain for virtual viewing of sexual acts, as opposed to your own physical presence within a sexual act with another person. Now we see young men as early as 20, 21 having impotence or erectile dysfunction because they've rewired their brain in order to facilitate only virtual sexual performance, not real life. Here we say real life ones. We're observing real life ones, right? Without consent. We're hiding somewhere where we're keeping time. Right? So you think of the driver behind that. There's power in doing something that someone doesn't know. It's almost like that. It's like the driver to steal. You receive a reward because you took something from someone. Possibly even more of a reward if they don't even know. Right? Here they're saying video voyeurism is on the rise. So maybe they say, hey, masturbation, watching pornography, or masturbation could be classified as a form of voyeurism. Right? Or they could say, hey, a particular type. Maybe voyeurism is only classified by watching live performances online. It can't be pre-recorded material or something, right? Maybe it needs to be the sense that we know this is happening right now, as opposed to just Googling some pornography.
So obviously you said there might be genetic aspects into it, but when we take, for example, erectile dysfunction through like pornography and stuff, there's been studies done that it's possible to reverse the effects, right? If the brain learns one thing and then you directly unlearn it. Has there been any studies that looked into, especially like parasympathetic disorders, and is there a way to correct or go against or start working the other way again? Because obviously once you get to these really harmful ones and like non-consenting and stuff, it's like it's harmful to other people. So is it more of a look at how do we keep these people, or keep society protected from these people, or is there any look into sort of way of vetting these people instead of just?
I mean, there's always a way, we say it's non-genetic. This happens to be a social phenomenon in some degree. We get agency analysis and behavior assessment. We say, hey, okay, we can look at what are you doing right before you do the act.
Yeah.
Like, what is the environment there that drives the stimulation for you to proceed to engage?
Yeah.
Like you just glimpse and see something online,
Yeah.
and now you're driven to it. Like, and then what happens in the behavior? How are you doing it? Right? You masturbate many of ways. Right? And what sort of the driver behind that particular way to masturbate? And what do you deem as the consequence, the ABC, antecedent behavior consequence? What do you deem as the consequence to this? You're like, hey, you know what? I'm lethargic. A loss of testosterone, right? And I would say other issues have been created. Now I'm gaining weight. Maybe I'm eating too much. Maybe I have depression because of lack of testosterone from masturbation or something. So now we've created a whole list of things. But yes, it can be corrected. Obviously, it's very pervasive now because the amount of exposure just kind of unwilling, right? It's going online, you go on Twitter, and you automatically expose to stuff you probably didn't want to see. And now unconsciously, you may watch it out of intrigue for a few seconds before you consciously decide to move along, right? But that still stays in memory. And that may be drivers to behavior. Some theories behind it is, well, issues with addictive masturbation. They would say meaninglessness, the sense of not having meaning, right? So a sense of having meaning will sort of drive us to participate in other things as opposed to, because masturbation is a pretty tricky. You're engaging in an act that nature has deemed to be responsible. It's like the highest form of an act, which is the act of procreating. Essentially, you're telling your brain, as well as your cells, that we just created life. That's a pretty powerful notion to just disregard it as just another pornographic experience of masturbation. And what that can do to the brain, because you just told the brain that you had sex, even though you didn't. So what does that do? That's highly disorienting, I would say probably partially creating like disassociative tendencies, where you start to disassociate reality from fantasy. Okay? And obviously when you're met with reality in its real sort of place, you may not have natural responses anymore that you once did before you began that particular predictive behavior. Comes along also, let me answer your question.
So the very second how it's like the highest form, you don't have to do is masturbating, you just do it, and that's like the highest form of creating life. So how does like, I mean obviously there's a difference, but like how does your body do it? It's not like this was just masturbation or this was like actual sex. Like how do you, like, because one is obviously more healthier than the other. So how does like the body differ? Like how does the body know?
The body doesn't, right? The body doesn't know that this was fake. It can't know, right? Your mind is the interpretation of the act that just took place. So your body is not programmed to know that this was a video or computer simulation. It's the same as watching a movie. You see a sad scene, you cry, right? The mind doesn't really have a real interpretation, nor does the body of projected image versus what happens in real life. These are just human creations and inventions that we make, right? And so, to me, is creating disturbances in sort of disassociative mechanisms, meaning that if done enough, let's say, because we say it has to be an addiction, right? Maybe masturbating in some healthy sense, right? Because there are studies to show that it's good for prostate, right? It may lower the chances of getting prostate cancer. It's good for regulating hormones. It's good to possibly parasympathetic nervous system, relaxing yourself, calm, getting good night's sleep, all of the above, right? It's good for regulating anxiety to a degree. So what we say what that degree is, we're not sure. But if it gets to a point where we say it's dysfunctional, we're like, wow, this is stifling my academic life. This is getting in the way of working out, of a healthy balance, relationship. It's getting in the way of my sexual performance with real human beings. Right? It's a problem. Right? So once it becomes a problem, then it needs to be addressed. But theoretically, if we're talking about this, like we don't know what the mix. Right? Never masturbate. You know, We could say, hey, spiritually, or it's probably the best way to go, right? But then we say, okay, we come back to reality. We're not perfect. We say, well, maybe just lower the amount done so it doesn't create a dysfunction to your life. Right? It's not disrupting anything. You still can perform sexually. You still are good at your schoolwork, your work, relationships with people, or even just interactions. Because now you begin to sexualize and fantasize with everybody you meet. Because now you think that's just the way it goes. Except if you're watching pornography, you're watching a production. You're watching a movie. Right? With a camera guy, and a lighting guy, and somebody holding a microphone. And now you're starting to believe the stuff on it is real. The stories, the anatomy. You're like, oh, these bus people seem like they are bigger or something. Right? That's not real life. That's not real life. So it's all sorts of things that can transfer to like the socialization process. This kind of makes us out of the loop. Right, not to mention the hormones. Right? We're talking testosterone. You decrease and deplete a lot of testosterone by doing so. Funny enough, well, oddly enough, when it comes to substance abuse and depressive disorders, young white males tend to be the highest on the list, right? When it comes to with issues of masturbation, and things like that. But that's relative, right? That's relative to what other sample.
Are you saying addiction mixed with masturbation? Like
Yes, usually fosters sense of depression, and depression is usually followed with some tendency to abuse substances. And substances, the alcohol, the drugs, paraphernalia, things of that nature. All right, let's see what else we got. All right, lastly, pedophilia. Activity prepubescent. Now we say prepubescent, 13 years or younger, and probably we can say that's subjective to the state, right? Because maybe we're talking here about statutory rape might be considered pedophilia. You know, your state says it's 17, and you're having sex with a 16-year-old. Illegal, right? So we're doing a few things. One, illegal behavior. Two, maybe psychological maturity is not there for someone of a certain age, right? Hence why the laws may follow that principle. What we said, we would classify them as a child. When a person acts on urges, when urges cause significant distress, a person may be diagnosed with pedophilic disorder. This is tricky. I mean, a lot of times they're not coming to report this illegal behavior they did, right? They go to jail. And this goes both ways. Right? It could be, say, female teachers at elementary school. Right? Boys worker. It could be males, right? Towards young women or young men. So it crosses both sizes. And remember we say there's different types. The type that feel more mentally and naturally inclined to be in the presence of children. Thus, even when it comes to sexual behavior, they feel more comfortable and natural sexually with children, as opposed to adults. Or the ones that are aggressive, right? They want to dominate in some way. Exude power over small children, right? Usually through violence, sexual violence, kidnapping, murder, things of that nature. Not necessarily really truly understood where it comes from, but some of the theories would be, hey, trauma as a child, right? Therefore, you're reliving the experiences when that took place. And usually your victims will be around the same age as when that took place for you. Or if you've done that as a child to someone else, that may still stick with your memory of you living out those experiences. When we said testosterone levels, prenatal very high production of testosterone. Other social factors. What do you think? What are some other factors you think that can contribute to this behavior? So it's difficult to estimate prevalence because of the stigma. We deem this as the worst of the worst. So obviously this is highly stigmatized. These are what we view as the worst people. Right? Yes.
Yeah, you said like other factors, social media for sure is one of them. I just seem like this thing where like this mom is like, she has like her family come on TikTok or whatever, and it's like she's posting her children, but then like it's the children doing that, let's just say she's looking out of a straw. And that video will have way more likes and saves than any video. It's just because
Now let me ask you, when we said men have more prevalence than women in most of these categories, right, including pedophilia, are you saying it gets more likes? Is there that many men out there that have that tendency or behavior?
studies, I've definitely seen studies, because I'm interested in this stuff.
Yeah.
She's 8, so,
Yeah.
definitely.
Anyone else has any?
And then whoever is acting, or whatever, they may not be getting enough attention from people at their own age group or anywhere near their own age group. They feel like whenever they're around kids, because you know how kids are, they'll nag and pay attention to you and listen to everything you say. So it could just tie to that also, like, oh, this child is always listening to everything I have to say. And it could be a dominance thing, like, or like a control thing, because, what is it called? Like when, like an older person, grooming, that's what it is, like it could be like a grooming thing. Also, just being able to have so much knowledgeability over someone's mind,
Yeah.
that could,
Yeah, absolutely. Because you think of the ease of manipulation to get what you want, as opposed to an adult, right, who has choices, decisions, no other behaviors to pick up on behaviors and stop your sexual urges from being fulfilled. It's a little bit more easier to talk about children who are mindful. Yes.
And to add credence to that, you hear all the time now about how people who used to be unknown, or they used to be losers, they had no friends, and now they make it big on the internet. And now we're in this day where your favorite YouTubers or influencers that you watched when you were a kid, now they're exposed to be pedophiles and groomers, and what a lot of the things that you see with that is that it's usually that influencer interacting with their younger fans, and that influencer who is like not socially conditioned, like they have some underdeveloped social skills that makes them think it's okay to talk about that type of stuff with like mostly like 15 to 16-year-olds is where those situations happen.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think if during childhood you didn't have the attention, or you were bullied, or you didn't have any power, right? That might be the age frame that stays in your mind, even as an adult, when you finally get access to resources or the ability to engage in sexual activity, you may still go back to have power with that specific age group. Right? Usually fostered from your own experiences of lack of power when you were that age group. You're trying to relive getting back dominance and power from a previous time. So yes.
would that also tie into like people who are like special needs, like their minds stay as children in their
Yeah.
mind, but they'll be born adults? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If we say, hey, if these individuals, some of them may feel normal in the setting of children, in essence, their mind frame is childlike, right? But it still is utilitarian to engage and communicate, put on a facade with the dogs, right? All right, let's do a discussion question. Let's see, what am I doing? do a couple more. Here's some more, I would say less common paraphilic behaviors. Clismophilia, sexual pleasure received with enemas, right? Enemas is injecting liquid into the colon so that you can use the bathroom quicker, faster, better. Some people engage in sort of that practice, right? The injection of, say, liquids. Telephone scatologia, sexual arousal associated with sexual and or obscene telephone calls to an unwilling participant. Making a phone call saying something obscene to someone who is unwilling, maybe kind of relative to that indecent exposure facilitation, right? You're looking for the shock value. The driver is shock value. Urophilia, sexual arousal associated with contact with urine. Right, we can say, hey, a little bit tricky because we do see fetishes of individuals who like to be urinated on, right? But this may even go a little bit further. Maybe you like to actually touch the urine and lay in a urine-filled bed or near a toilet, something like that. Maybe you like to watch individuals urinate as well too. Necrophilia, sexual gratification obtained by viewing or having intercourse with a corpse. Right, we think, hey, sex appears to be the most dominant, one of the most dominant, right? Maybe act of killing someone may be up there as well too, taking life. But we say, sex, which is in essence naturally physical, creating life, killing, which is actually, taking away life, those may be the two most powerful forces in terms of dominance. Right? Say there are maybe very few things up there at the list. One thing that could be like slavery or something like that. Right? So these drivers have a lot to do with power, dominance over something. We think of even necrophilia, like we're having intercourse with something that can't respond, it's dead. What's that power feel like for the person who has that behavior? Bestiality or zoophilia, sexual contact between humans and animals, right? Once again, we're talking about creatures that either not in a state to respond or don't have the capacity. Kind of the same thing, we're talking about children who don't have the capacity to respond. Right? We're looking at animals, we're looking at dead people. Right? So this, as you leave class today, think of how a lot of sex is driven by dominance and power subjected to the participant. Because it is powerful. Philosophically, say, it creates life. It's supposed to.